bolts with the snap ring and simply push down on the end of the servo pin. You're looking for a travel anywhere from 3/8 to 1/4 of an inch. Next, air check the servo by pushing air through this hole. About 40 to 50 psi works just fine. You can view the band's operation through this window just below the filter seal in the pump area. Each time the servo is hit with air, the band should tighten around the reverse drum. And now let's go to the bottom of the transmission and air check the low and reverse clutch pack through this hole. You can watch the clutch pack's movement through this window located just above the apply hole. This doesn't require much air either. About the same you used on the servo, 40 to 50 psi. Next, install the park rod bracket. The park rod lays between the parking pole and case. Slide the park rod through the bracket. Make sure the parking pole sets on this side of the rod. Install the 2 bolts and torque them to 23 foot-pounds. As an update to the unit, remove this steel 1/4 inch check ball. Removing the ball will help to exhaust the fluid from the low and reverse clutch pack when the gear selector is moved from reverse to drive. To remove the ball, simply bend back these 2 tabs in the orifice. Do not remove the orifice, leave it in the case. Next, let's rebuild the 4th accumulator. Replace the D-ring on the piston. Insert the guide pin. Lube and insert the piston, the legs of the piston, towards the valve body. Install the spring. And last, install the 1/4 inch steel check ball into the sink located just above the 4th accumulator bore. Next, replace the 2 solenoid screens. And notice on which side of the plate they snap to. Install the case to spacer plate gasket. The 2 spacer plate gaskets are marked for identification. C for case and V for the valve body side of the plate. Set both gaskets one at a time on the plate and look for any covered holes. If you find any holes that are covered by the gasket, then you either have the wrong gasket or a faulty one. Set 2 guide pins in 2 of the valve body's bolt holes across from each other. After you set the case gasket in place, then set the spacer plate on top of the gasket. Set the valve body to plate gasket on top of the plate. Next, install the hold down plate and the 3 retaining bolts. Do not tighten them yet. Move the guide pins to these positions here. These 2 holes are the lineup holes for the 2 gaskets, the spacer plate, and the valve body. Once you have the gaskets and plate lined up, then tighten and torque the 3 hold down plate screws to 96 inch-pounds. Notice the 2 identification letters, V and C. The 2 solenoid screens and their positions. Next, install the wiring harness, replace and lube the O-ring, and simply snap the harness into place. Install the manual valve link. Next, install the 7 1/4 inch steel check balls into these passages routed in the valve body. On installing the valve body to the case, you will need to turn the valve body over. In doing this, you will lose the 7 1/4 inch check balls. To prevent this from happening, Pack the holes with trans gel or petroleum jelly, pasting the check balls in place. Now flip the valve body over and slide the manual valve link to the hole machined in the manual valve. Remove the 2 guide pins and install 2 valve body bolts in their place. Leave them loose to line up the valve body. Next, replace the O-ring on the snout of the lockup solenoid. Then install the lockup solenoid into the pump assembly. Clip the 2-3 control solenoid to the harness, the force motor to the harness, and then shift solenoid B, solenoid A. Then install all the valve body bolts, finger tight. Don't forget that dipstick guard. Install the 2 lockup solenoid bolts, torque them to 96 inch-pounds. Install the pressure manifold switch, leave the bolts finger tight. Connect it to the harness. Now torque the valve body bolts, as well as the ones that run through the pressure manifold switch. Torque them in 3 steps. First to 40 inch-pounds, then second to 65 inch-pounds, and the final torque to 96 inch-pounds. Torque them in a spiral pattern, starting in the center and working your way out. Next, let's rebuild the second accumulator. First, replace the D-ring on the piston. Install the big spring, then the small spring. Lube and install the piston with the legs of the piston facing towards the 2 springs. If you're working on an early model, then the piston and springs may be reversed. Install and torque the accumulator housing bolts to 96 inch-pounds. Install the detent lever. Torque the bolt to 100 inch-pounds. If your transmission uses a PWM TCC solenoid, install it now, connecting it to the harness. Install a new filter. Lay the pan gasket on the case. Install the bottom pan. Don't forget that magnet. Torque the pan bolts to 96 inch-pounds. Now flip the transmission over and replace the square cut O-ring on the extension housing. Install the extension housing and torque the bolts to 26 foot-pounds. Install a new rear seal. Next, install the VSS. Replace the O-ring. If your transmission uses a bolt-on bell housing, install it now. Next, replace the lockup O-ring on the end of the turbine shaft. The popular colors in use today is either black or green. Install a new dipstick seal, commonly called a hat seal. Next, replace the shaft lever seal. You may have to remove some outside linkage to access the seal. To service this seal, you will need this tool set. There are 2 styles in production today. A set for the early short shaft and a set for the late long shaft. This tool set consists of 2 pieces, the seal removal tool and the seal installation tool. At the end of the removal tool, you will notice tapered threads cut into the body of the tool, and at the other end, a bolt. Now screw this bolt out except for about 5 to 10 threads. Then slide the tool over the shaft with the tapered threads facing the old seal. Tap at the end of the bolt while screwing the body of the tool clockwise. Then run the bolt up tight against the end of the shaft. Holding the body of the tool, pull the old seal out. Then clean the seal cavity. Install the new seal, working it around the shaft, taking care not to damage the rubber part of the seal. Now, using the installation side of this tool set the seal into the case. Then reinstall any park linkage. And that's it! You're finished! Oh, wait a minute, one more thing. Let's install the torque converter. I highly recommend that you purchase a new or a rebuilt converter when rebuilding this particular style of transmission. First, lube the lockup O-ring. Then charge the new torque converter with about 1/2 to a pint of transmission fluid. When installing the torque converter, you will need to spline the turbine shaft to the turbine in the converter, the stator splines to the stator in the converter, and the pump rotor to the slots machined in the hub on the converter. To check to see if it's all the way in, slide the converter all the way to the pump casting. You should not be able to slide your fingers between the bowl of the converter and the pan rail. And that's it! Now you're done! Except for the installation part. Before installing the transmission in the vehicle, do your valve body a favor and remove the trash from the trans cooling system. Using a catch container, push air through both cooler lines, removing the old fluid. After the fluid is exhausted from the cooling system, the air should move freely. If not, then the system is restricted and the radiator will need to be replaced. With the engine off, start with 6 quarts, use Dextron 3, and be good to your transmission. Use a high quality fluid. Then start the vehicle, add an additional 5 quarts, then check the fluid. Bring the fluid level just above the cross hatches edged in the dipstick. This will overfill the transmission about a pint, giving the rotating parts better lubrication. Do not overfill the transmission more than a pint. After you have achieved the correct level, clear any codes stored in the computer. Using proper jack stands, raise the rear wheels off the ground, hit the brakes, then move the selector to reverse, release the brakes, then lightly mash on the gas pedal. The rear wheels should move in reverse. Let them turn for about 45 seconds. Do not turn the wheels any faster than 10 miles per hour while in the reverse position. Before moving into the drive position, completely stop the wheels from turning. Never move from reverse to forward or vice versa while the wheels are turning. This is one good way to strip or snap the spline collar on that sun shell. Moving the selector to drive, the wheels should move in a forward direction. Let the transmission shift through all the gears. Bring the wheels to a stop and let the trans shift again. Do this several times. Then go for a road test. During the road test, you will need to check for lockup. Lightly tap the brake pedal, just enough to turn on the brake lights. This is just before the brake system applies the brake pads to stop the vehicle. Looking at the tachometer, you should see and hear about a 200 RPM raise in engine speed. Release the pedal and you should get a drop in RPMs. If not, then lockup does not work and the transmission will not survive without it. Lockup must work. No lockup will end the transmission life quickly. Next, check for any leaks. check the fluid, and check for any codes. See, that wasn't all that hard, was it? I told you you could do it.